friend. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Parents Who Write. Today, I have with me Maria Costanzo Palmer, who is a narrative nonfiction author, Page Turner Award finalist, and grant writer. She lives in New Jersey with her husband and their two children, ages 9 and 7. You worked on your narrative nonfiction book, On the Rocks, for 17 years.
I know.
Why did it take so long?
Yes, that's the question of the almost 2 decades, right? That is a question that I got consistently from my father. Like anytime I had a milestone in my life, whenever we announced that we were pregnant with our first daughter, his first response was, he was, of course, over the moon and very happy. And then his second response was, I guess my book is just never going to happen. And then whenever we announced our second daughter, he just kind of gave up all hope. He was like, yeah, this is just not going to be. So yes, it took a very, very long time. 17 years is a crazy amount of time. But let me tell you, Erin, whenever I first started this project, I actually started it as a family history project. The book is a narrative nonfiction book. So it's definitely a nonfiction story, but it reads much like fiction. And it's the rise and fall of my father and his life. And he was, during the 80s and 90s, the Italian restaurateur, one of the top 10 Italian restaurateurs in the country by the International Hospitality Rating Bureau. And he took this small failing business and turned it into this wonderful world-class restaurant. So there were a lot of gems in this. And whenever we first started this project, it really started as a family history. But I'm a writer by trade, as you had sort of mentioned at the top of this podcast. I'm also a grant writer. So I'm always looking to sell my nonprofit, and I do that through the stories and images of the people that we touch. And so as my father told these crazy stories, because of course, every good book has a little twist of fate, right? So the good news is he was able to create this mastermind of a wonderful Italian restaurant. The bad news is just as fast as it rose, it fell because he became subject to a federal investigation that landed him eventually in prison. So this was kind of a healing project for us. I would ask him, because whenever we lost the restaurant, it was a really hard time for him. And so I would say, hey, tell me about a time where something really crazy happened at the restaurant. Like maybe a customer came in and you were expecting the night to go one way and it went another way. So he would start to tell me all of these stories. And I had that, classic tape deck recorder that I used back in college. And I would just record him. And I started to notice that these stories weren't just, oh, well, back in the day, I walked uphill both ways to school. No, it was like, yeah, did I ever tell you the time that Johnny from down the street brought in a stripper after hours and then he left and then she became pantsless and I had to figure out how to sneak her back outside of the restaurant after hours without getting caught and take her home. And I was like, no, do tell. So I started to realize that it had a large commercial appeal, but I didn't really know how to get it there. And it actually sat vacant because, as I said, life happened. So probably for at least 5 years, I did absolutely nothing with it. I just kind of let it sit. But I had all of these great gems, and I sort of had the idea that this could be something. Originally, it was written in his perspective and my perspective. Since then, it's not. It's completely 100% in his voice. But it took a lot of time to figure out what the story was and from whose perspective it needed to be told. So I think that is why, a large reason why it took me so long.
Yeah. So you said that it sat for 5 years. Whew. Um, how did you keep going? You mentioned previously that you brought your AP English teacher in as your co-writer. So was that the catalyst? And how did that collaboration begin? And what were the benefits?
Sure. So, it's life is sometimes very serendipitous, right? And my old AP English high school teacher, and she was also a middle school teacher of mine too. Her name is Ruthie Robbins, and she grew up in the same neighborhood that my dad's restaurant was in, which no one had ever heard of until the Buffalo Bills, Damar Hamlin situation where he passed out this past fall on the field and went into cardiac arrest. He is actually from McKees Rocks. So this nothing town that nobody ever had heard about, like now everybody kind of knows where it is. They know it's a small little suburb of Pittsburgh. So my co-author, Ruthie, grew up in McKees Rocks, and she's actually the same exact age as my father. She was my high school teacher, so she knew my family very, very well. And her oldest son and I were always very close friends. And weirdly enough, after college, we both moved to Los Angeles for a stint of time. So I was in touch with him. Therefore, I was also in touch with her. And to top it off, she was a very good customer at the restaurant. So she experienced all of the things that we wrote about in the book. And she knew my father very, very well. She knew his personality. She ate at the restaurant. She really enjoyed the food. So whenever she found out through her son that I was working on this project, she immediately asked me, well, where is it and what are you doing? And she had, at the time, she left Pittsburgh. She moved to Buffalo, New York, and she was actually editing books for a writers group in Buffalo. And so whenever I had told her that, I had all of these different vignettes, but I didn't really know how to weave them together. I didn't even know if they were good. They were my perspective and his perspective, and I was just really having trouble with the story. She said, well, I can just take it to my writers group and we can certainly talk about it and see if there's any potential here. And the one thing that she walked away from was, yes, it definitely needs some work for sure, but in the same sense, there's a lot of potential here. And this is really could be a huge commercial hit. So it's definitely, worth our while to really work on it. And that's what we did. We worked really diligently, probably now for the past 5 years together. And, at first it was really just kind of mucking through the fact that we were just going to write it in his perspective. And then it was really looking closely at each story and asking ourselves the question, does this move the narrative forward? And it was really tough because some of the things that we really loved, we realized that it didn't move the narrative forward. So there was lots of cutting room floor, lots of editing, lots of thinking about, are these two characters too similar of a person? Do they need to be combined? Does this person's identity need to be changed slightly so we don't get killed? Like, those types of
right.
scenarios, just like small things, right?
As a inline editor, that is my day job for both fiction and nonfiction. I really loved hearing you say that part about, does this section move the narrative forward? Because that's one of the primary things that I do as a line editor is when I'm reading through chapters and I identify the purpose of a chapter and I'll be like, this scene's really great, but the goal of this chapter is this.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not helping the goal of the chapter. It's actually really distracting.
Mm-hmm.
Did you save those cut bits, though, to put in newsletters for your promo bits? Because they make great cut scenes and samples of your writing and those deleted scenes, like kind of the bloopers or the gag reel of writing in a sense, right? But people love getting those side stories. So
Absolutely. 100%. I think the beauty in this taking 17 years is there was so much thought put behind it. And we do
mhm.
have a bunch of beautiful stories that ended up on the cutting room floor. And
Mm,
the piece that ended up most on the cutting room floor was everything that was taken from my perspective. So,
wow.
um, even though the story is written in his perspective, I'm an important piece because, as I had mentioned, he got into some trouble with a tax evasion charge. And whenever we found out that he was getting in trouble, I was in college and I was at my family's home in between college jobs. And the federal
Mhm,
government came to the door whenever I was home
mhm,
alone looking for him. So I've actually been able to start an entirely new book based upon my perspective from, of course, that's very heavy whenever you're 20 years old and you find out this information. And this was a complete surprise and shock. My family were great people and we continue to be great people through all of this, but we were pretty much like the local family that people had an enormous amount of respect for. Everybody knew because, in addition to my dad being a restaurateur, he had run for public office. He had a radio show for a bit of time. He had a column in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. So he was quite popular throughout the city. And whenever this happened, our lives really flipped upside down. So
yeah.
those pieces have really kind of taken shape into another project that I'm currently working
Mhm,
on. There were also some scenes that we cut from his perspective that I'm definitely going to look at, publishing possibly in a magazine or a
mm,
newspaper, or like you said, just even doing it as a promo or even just stories for whenever I'm on podcast,
yeah.
because they're great stories. It's just for one reason or another, like you said, it didn't necessarily move the goal of the chapter forward. And
Mhm.
it's easy to, when you write for 17 years, it's easy to rack up the page count. And,
Yes, I would
that was
imagine.
another thing too, is just sort of realizing in my genre, I, I cannot have a book that's 150,000 words. No one will
Yeah,
buy
no.
it. So,
Yeah.
knowing that my sweet spot really needed to be somewhere between 65,000 and on the high end, like maybe 90,000, that's
Yeah.
another determining factor. Some of the things that made it on the cutting room floor did really belong in the story and did move the story forward. It's just we didn't have space for them. So that was the
Mhm.
other piece. But, my whole thought is from a reader's perspective, whenever somebody reads my book, I want them to say, I wish I had more of this, not when is this thing going to be over? Like,
Yes, that is
you
true,
know? So,
right?
got to make some hard
That's
decisions sometimes. But, when you write for
yeah.
17 years, you got a lot of pages. That's the thing.
Yeah, my revisions that I'm working on with my current novel, granted, it's fantasy fiction. Um, but for first time authors, you kind of don't want to go above the 110K.
Hmm.
And I'm at 135.
Hmm.
So decisions
Sure.
await me.
But with
Yeah.
fantasy though, I think you can go slightly higher if I'm thinking correctly, right?
You can, but I'm really pushing it. Like for first time fantasy authors, you kind of want to stay between 90 and like 120.
Okay.
And so I was aiming for 110 and now I'm at 135. So I've shot past the 120 ideal. Um so I don't know. I don't know. Well, yeah. but it's fun. I love my revisions. They're going great. I have a literary writing background, so I'm toggling that line between genre fantasy and literary fiction.
Mm.
And yeah, so I have plenty of simple sentences for quick pace, and then I've got like 120 word sentence. So
Right. The
yeah,
flowery, beautiful
right?
language. I
I
give it
mean,
up
I just,
to the literary writers though, because you guys just know how to craft just such a beautiful scene, as you write. I feel like I know. I feel like with narrative nonfiction people, we're just telling you how it is. Like this is what
you
went
know,
down, like
I
very
I do the
action
same.
packed.
Yeah, action packed. I do the same thing with my creative nonfiction too, though. I think it's just my writing style that I love syntactic design. I love the flow of sentences. I love how you can add in, um, your clauses and a positives in order to just add layers to a sentence. And it's not necessarily just flowery language because I don't want people to roll their eyeballs at too much flowery language. Um, it's more about the layers of meaning that you can build into a sentence, and I
Sure.
have way too much fun with that, and so I try to balance that in with simpler descriptions as well.
Yeah.
But it leads to 135K, and I am only on revisions up through chapter 10 out of I don't know how many because I don't know, but my chapters are averaging now around 4K. So fun time. Okay. Well, anyway, moving
Yeah.
on. So let's see, where are we at? Okay. So okay. So moving on. You said or you talked, let me try that again. I am the one who botches up my sentences. So moving on, um, okay, no, I hate it because now people are just going to hear me being like, so, like it becomes this weird, awkward transition. I'm like, oh, okay. So moving on, you mentioned working with your high school English teacher, and then you started talking about how you began shopping this manuscript around in 2021 with your agents. So, and how much I love this. You describe shopping your manuscript to agents as another layer of Dante's hell.
Sure.
Please tell us more.
Yeah, it was quite that fantastic. Well, part of it is I'm a first time author. And although I'm a writer by trade, I write grants. So it's a very different type of writing that I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing. There is some similarities and some overlap, but the difference between grants and actually writing a manuscript, um, with a manuscript, there's not a whole lot of spoken rules, right? Like with grants, it's very similar to college application.
Mm-hmm.
You are given guidelines. Here are your 10 questions that you need to explain in, 100 words or less and go. And it's
Mm-hmm.
due by this date. And we want 10 copies stapled in the right hand corner with paper clips and a couple of pictures and a supporting story that's got to be XYZ length, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's very much, you can check everything off on a box and you really do. I mean, there are certain things that are incredibly political and lots of nepotism. But if you follow all of the rules, the thing is you do have a shot of getting the
Mm-hmm.
grant. And, especially if you've gotten other grants, money begets money, right? And so it's very easy to get all of the knowledge as a grant writer. Um, I would say whenever you're jumping into the publishing world, and at least this is my perspective because I
Mm-hmm.
hadn't been there until I decided to write this book, right? It is a very nebulous kind of situation. And first of all, there's not one path. There's several different paths. There's several different genres. There's several different ways to publish. There's several different things that people do before they publish, people that they have potentially help them or don't help them, ways that they market their idea or not, ways that they decide to sell their book or not. Like, there's just so many factors into this that it's hard to know everything. And, I've
Mm-hmm.
found that you just don't know what you just don't know, right? Until you get there. And so for me, I did know a couple of things. I knew that we were wrapping up our writing in the summer of 2020, which is really like, if you want to choose a worse time to be a writer, like that would be up there because what was everybody doing during the summer of 2020? A whole bunch of nothing. So everybody that had ever thought in their life, like maybe I could write a book, yeah, that's what they were doing. So there
Yes.
was so much competition.
And making bread,
And
writing
making
books
bread.
and making bread.
Yes. Yeah. So much sourdough bread and so
Yep.
many books. And I'm
Yep.
sure probably a lot of babies kind of happened at that time too. But there was so much going on. Right. And so I knew a couple of things. I knew that this did have some commercial potential. I
Mm-hmm.
also knew that, from some of the conferences that I had attended and some of the Facebook groups that I'm a part of, I knew that once you could always shop a manuscript and you could always try to go the traditional route. You could try to get an agent. You could try to then put your book on submission and get a publisher. And if things didn't work out that way, you could always choose a different route. You could always self publish or choose to serialize your book, or there's like a million different things that you could do with your book. So for
Mm-hmm.
me, it kind of made sense to give the traditional route a try, at least, because I knew that if I went the self publishing way, I wasn't going to be able to turn back, and go the
Mm-hmm.
traditional way. I mean, I know that that happens once in a blue moon, but not likely for first time author, really. So we took the summer of 2020, we had 8 beta readers, and I was very, very lucky because many of my beta readers were people that I met at college. I went to Syracuse University. And
Mm.
so lots of media people. My husband as well is an ex Hollywood person. Some of my best friends to this day work for CNBC as producers. They work on Oscar award winning films. So I was at an advantage because I knew that I could give this to people for free and just say, could you give me some feedback and, get some halfway decent feedback. So that's what we did through the fall of 2020. I also
Mhm.
started at that point to query the book, which is basically kind of your pitch for your book to different agents. I learned the hard way that you should never do that unless if you're a narrative nonfiction, you must have a complete manuscript, not just hey, this is, good enough, a complete polished, edited 5 times
Mhm.
over manuscript and a full book
Yeah.
proposal. And so I queried too early, and I did have a couple of people request full manuscripts, which I could not deliver. And I
Oh.
got, I sent them what I had, but it really wasn't, they were
Mm.
looking for, something that they could turn around very easily with very little work to sell. And that wasn't what I
Mhm.
had at the time. So we
Yeah.
really took all of 2020 to try to perfect this. And then we really started in 2021 seeking agents, hardcore. And so that's when our acquisitions process really, I think, would officially started, even though we, had a
Yeah.
little prequel in the summer of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
I had mentioned before, you don't know what you don't know. And I think whenever I was getting into this, I did not know how competitive it was going to be. And so whenever we started this, I didn't realize that no matter who you are, unless you're, Brad Pitt or maybe like Angelina Jolie, nobody in the publishing world is really going to roll out the red carpet for you. And especially right now, the competition is so stiff that people are looking for ways to say no to you. Even if your manuscript is good, and even if it does have some potential, if they don't think it's an easy sell, if you have any strikes against you, and for my manuscript in particular, they kept on saying this is more of a local story. It's not a national story. And I kept on saying, well, I don't think that that's right because, look at Cheers. Look at like everybody's got a favorite neighborhood restaurant that they go to that just has this nostalgic piece in their heart. Like, I do think it has national potential. But whenever I started really, querying on paper, I had sent out 265 queries, which is like a whole ton, right? And out of those, 108 people completely ghosted me. I never heard from them, like not one time. Even whenever I nudged and I actually had an offer, like they didn't even give me consideration. And whenever you're talking about Aaron, like I'm submitting to them not only just a query letter, but for some people, they request right out front, they want your query letter. They want your manuscript, which, as I had said earlier, was around 85, 90,000 words at that time. And then they want your book proposal. And your book proposal is your whole marketing plan of how you're going to turn this book into a hit and how you're going to, what your audience is and how you're going to grab that audience and how you're going to get the book into the hands of those people. And so my proposal alone with the sample chapters was 60 pages. So I'm giving people an entire query letter, an entire manuscript, a 60-page proposal, and then also I was giving them over the summer before we started querying, I started doing these short testimonial videos for celebrities that had come to the restaurant. So I was also giving them that. And people didn't really even have the courtesy to say thanks, but no thanks. Nothing. It was just amazing. It was amazing to me. So it was really, really rough. And I think that at that time, too, it really did a number on my confidence, right? Because, I was going in there thinking, all right, it's polished, everybody, with my 8 beta readers, if 2 or more people said XYZ doesn't work, or, you need to change this about the character, this doesn't make sense in the plot, this is out of order, I really paid attention to that. And Ruthie and I went back, and she's like the master at grammar and revising and rewriting and perfectionism. So we really took a lot of time to thoughtfully, recraft this thing a gazillion times. And so to not hear anything, it was worse than hearing a no, right? Like,
Yeah.
I almost got excited whenever I would even just get a form letter and say, oh, hey, thanks for submitting. This is just not for me, like good luck with your search. But the ghosting was really, I think that in itself should now be another layer of Dante's hell. Like, I think we should add it to the book.
Thank you for sharing 265 queries, because I have said multiple times on this podcast that a lot of times it can be a numbers game. And so Sarah Burnett, who had her book of poetry published, She had submitted her book of poetry, I think it was like 85 times. And so, there's other people where they're like, "Oh, I submitted my short story." And I'm like, "That's fantastic. How many times did you submit it?" And they're like, "Twice." And I'm like,
Yeah,
"No,
no, not gonna cut it now.
gotta."
Mm-mm.
And it's so hard, like you said, because it's that hit on your confidence every time you get that no, but you've got to keep pushing it out there. So, how did you exit Dante's hell? And with all that you dealt with, why did you still push yourself for traditional publishing instead of switching to self-publishing?
Those
Right?
are
Like,
really good questions. That would, I guess I enjoy just self-torture,
no,
That's
I was gonna say that. I really thought you were gonna say, I guess I enjoy proving people wrong. Your
no,
answer was
I
way
think
more
I,
humorous.
I think I enjoy torturing myself. What changed for me and what sort of pushed the button for me, again, I'll bring this up, is you don't know what you don't know, right? And the
Hmm.
more that you can expose yourself, I was part of the Manuscript Academy Facebook group, and someone had mentioned in the Manuscript Academy that they were going to an online writing workshop and that they were
Mm,
having an ability to pitch agents at an online writing workshop.
okay.
And, I followed the thread and they eventually gave the name of the one that they were going to, which is called Writing Day Workshop, I think, Writer's
Mhm,
Day or Writing Day Workshop by Brian Clems. And I thought, you know
mhm,
what? I'm not doing anything. It's like the middle of the pandemic. I'm locked here in my house. What do I have to lose? And there was a conference that was in Minnesota, AKA right here in New Jersey,
uh-huh.
in my basement as I'm sitting here. And I thought, you know what? It's now or never. And I always felt like with my story, I kept on saying to people, if I can get in front of somebody, I can tell you why my story needs to be told. And, as I sort of said previously, right now the competition is so stiff. And,
Mhm,
a lot of times agents have assistants just quickly scanning queries. And if it doesn't fit nicely into all of the boxes that they're looking for, or if they don't have a heads up from editors of what they're looking to buy, they'll just say no because there are, for every one person that's out there, there are like, 500 more waiting in line. So it's easy to be picky. It's the same
yeah.
with, I dated my husband way before cell phones and online dating. But now I kind of feel like everybody has this mentality that they're a 10, right? Because
Mhm,
when you go onto these apps, there's so many choices, and that's not how we used to do things. It's like you used to do things and it was organic and you built relationships with people and you kind of met people happenstance. It was very old school, right? And now I
mhm,
think because we are in such a global digital techie type of world, it, allows for just instantaneous people that sort of pop out of the woodwork that maybe wouldn't have before. And so I thought, you know what? I know that I'm not doing great with queries. I think what on my queries at that particular time, I think I had maybe one or two full requests and a couple of partial requests, but almost nothing.
mhm,
Once I went to this online workshop and I got an opportunity to pay a nominal fee to pitch agents, my request rate went up to 93%. And it was
wow.
pretty incredible. And for the people that didn't request,
Mhm,
some of them were just, I'm glad that they didn't request because there really wasn't a, symmetry between the two of us.
mhm,
But the people that didn't request also too were able to give me some really great feedback as to why they didn't or what would have made the manuscript stronger. And you're not going to get that feedback in a traditional query. People are just going to say no. And if they do stop and give you that feedback, if you get a personal rejection back, good for you. You've done very, very well because, most agents are not paid until, you get paid and they make a deal for you. So they're taking out their time in their day and they're giving you some personalized feedback. It really means that they think that your manuscript has a lot of potential. So, take those rejections as a win. But, I met my agent at that conference in Minnesota back in February of 2021. And whenever I met her, we sort of instantly connected. And I could just see, as I was pitching her and telling her about the story, I could just see the light bulbs like, boop, 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 like, flashing in her head. And she said, I can pitch this to all of my narrative nonfiction editors. I can pitch this as a white crime story. I can pitch this to my biography people. I can pitch this as a pop culture. I can pitch this as a food memoir. I can pitch this as a celebrity piece. I can pitch this like a million different ways as a recipe kind of situation. So for her, she just saw a lot of diversity into the ways that this would be very marketable for different editors that she had connections with. And then whenever I was talking to her, she too came from a background that she didn't know anything about publishing and ended up working her way into, she was also like in Texas, which is not really like the hub of publishing, right? But she worked herself in making and creating a newspaper and learned about publishing that way, and then kind of went into book publishing, wrote some of her own books, and then started making relationships with editors and started getting clients. And, that's where she had a lot of challenges just sort of getting the lay of the land at first. And I think that she saw a lot of her young self in me, being a woman, being from an area that doesn't necessarily scream like, all right, I'm going to publish your book like right away, So she was very helpful and very, it kind of felt like she just had things that she wanted to teach me. And I got a really good vibe over the call with her. And even at that, agents are so backed up. I did not get an offer from her until July of 2021. So it's almost, I guess, 7 months after I met her. So, the piece of advice that I would give to people on that is agents are backed up right now. So if you don't hear from somebody and they've requested a full manuscript from you, do not panic. It's just the way that things are right now. Certainly keep the agent in the loop about your progress, or if something changes, or if you're on Erin Canning's podcast, or, anything, anything new. But, don't be annoying, but stay in touch with them, but know that they probably are not writing you off. If you had that connection with them, it's probably just taking them a while to get through all of their slush pile, unfortunately.
Whew. Major pile. Wow. So tell us about that dream moment, the dream email.
Oh my gosh. Well, the dream was almost dead, to be honest. So
right?
we went on submission in September of 2021. And we had a lot of those close passes that I had talked about before, where these just really fantastic rejections. And I won't say the name of the person, but it's a very, very, very famous kitchen memoir from a very, very, very famous individual. And one of the reasons why we were getting a lot of rejection is people were saying, I don't think that it holds water next to this person's tell-all kind of memoir. But my most favorite rejection that happened was that person's editor for several years that started this particular imprint wrote me a rejection letter. But in the rejection letter, he was so complimentary. He wrote 5 paragraphs of why he thinks this book has so much value and that it is simple but very complicated just where it needs to be. And it's a story that's very easily relatable, but has a lot of these like interesting twists and turns that you're not expecting, and that he is going to pass because he didn't feel the bone deep connection, but he feels like whoever's going to take this on, he wants them to be as passionate as we are as the authors. And he just wasn't feeling that, personalized connection to it, but really love the book and love the writing. And for me, I think that was the impetus of, okay, maybe this will happen, even though we're getting a lot of rejections. But even at that, it still took a long time. By the time we signed with our publisher, it was over a year. And whenever we were approaching a year, in publishing, people kind of talk about a couple of different timelines. Like, first is the 6-month timeline being on submission of like, this is not looking so hot if you haven't, gotten a sale by then. To me, I think 6 months right now is pretty quick in publishing. But the year is definitely something that if you follow any of the social media boards, everybody talks about that dreaded 1 year of being on submission and how it's just much more unlikely for a book to sell. And so I was at my parents' house over the summer in Pittsburgh. And, this book has been really my dad's dream for a lot of years. And, when I was on submission, he kept on asking me, what's happening with the book? Like, when has it sold yet? Is it getting close? Is anybody interested? And, it just broke my heart to keep on saying, I don't know. Like, I haven't heard anything. It doesn't seem like anybody's biting on it. Like, I don't really know what the next step is, because I just falsely assumed you get an agent and then you get a deal and like, that's it. Right. I mean, and I think that authors kind of think that way too. They see people who have representation as somebody that's quote unquote made it. No, like we haven't made it at all. If anything, like we feel worse about ourselves because somebody's chosen to represent us and we haven't sold one thing. It's like a very sad situation. And so I was at my parents' house and visiting with my youngest daughter. And my parents, we were supposed to be there for that weekend because I take each of my kids separately on a vacation to Pittsburgh every summer, and I let them plan 10 things that they want to do. And it's sometimes as simple as like eating Lucky Charms every morning to like as complex as going to the local amusement park or water park or, having like a spa day with my sister who's a beautician, like all kinds of stuff. So we're in Pittsburgh for the first 2 days. Everything's going great. And then one morning, my mom wakes up and she's not feeling so hot. And she takes the COVID test and finds out that it is positive. And then my dad turned positive. So needless to say, we ended up kind of cutting our trip early and going to Hershey, Pennsylvania, because nobody really wanted to be around us at that time. It was still kind of like, in the time where you weren't totally like socializing with people yet, like it was getting back to normal, but not totally back to normal. And so we were in a hotel in Hershey, PA, and my daughter and I had spent the day in Hershey Park, and my phone goes off and I look and it's from a publisher. And it was a line that I'm very familiar with, which is, "Dear Maria, thank you for submitting On the Rocks." And then normally what comes next is, we appreciate your submission, but we, unfortunately are
Yep.
not interested at this time, or,
Mm-hmm.
you know how it goes.
Yep.
And that's not what came next. So we had just gotten done with the park. It was pouring down rain. I was sitting in my car. I read this, like, what? Like, I think this kind of means that they are interested in me, right? Because the next line says, we are interested in speaking with you further about your manuscript, right? But
Oh.
because I was so programmed, either to be ghosted or to be rejected, I was thinking in
Mm-hmm.
my mind, maybe they just say that to like everybody, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
call my agent. I said, hey, I got this email. Like, is this for real? And
Yeah.
so she said, well, I'm going to call I know this guy, and I'm going to call him, and, we're going to straighten it out. So she found out that it was for real. So I was, literally on vacation, after like being quarantined. And that's whenever I got the news. And then it was still that was in August, and it took until October until we, signed our contract. So it still took a bit of time, but from August on, I definitely was breathing a sign of relief, just knowing that the process was going to be figured out, whether or not it was with this particular publisher or whether or not somebody would choose to make a competing offer. I knew that at least we had an offer. And that to me, I don't want to get emotional, but that to me really
Oh.
meant everything, because, my dad was and still is not completely well. And,
Mm.
the one thing that he's wanted most is to have this story in print and available. And, I felt like I was failing and, not being able to do this for 17 years. So to know that
Mm.
there was a path forward at that moment, like that was really powerful. And it really
Wow.
turned around kind of like a very crappy muckety muck trip into something very celebratory and awesome. And we ate lots of Hershey's candy that night, and it was really cool. And
Yes. Did you So after your agent called and verified and then called you again and said, no, this is like legit, did you call your dad?
oh yeah, I did. And I said I told him, nothing's for sure yet because I don't want to get your hopes up, but we do have a bite. And once I get back to New Jersey, I'm going to have a call with this publisher and with my agent and with Ruthie, and we're going to
Hmm.
try to, sort through this. I have no idea what this looks like, or, if this is really something that they're interested in or not in, but, it's out of all the news that we've received in the past year, this is definitely the most positive. Um, and he was cautiously optimistic at that particular
Mm.
point, but I would stress the cautiously part.
Okay. So then I want to sit in this moment because it's just so exciting after everything that you've led us to with Dante's Hell and, the 265 queries and the 108 ghostings. And now it's starting to come together. So you get to New Jersey and you have this call with everybody. And what you walk away going, we have a contract, we have a deal. Like it's gonna happen, right?
Yeah. Yep. It took probably after that call, it took about a week for us to get the first, written offer, for us to
Hmm.
kind of review and negotiate. But I just remember even whenever I was on the call with the publisher, I kept on like pinching myself. Is this really real? Like what's going on here?
Yeah.
But I think once I got that email with the contract, and it
Hmm.
had the book's name in it, and it had my name and Ruthie's name, And it also had a potential release date and, some of the other particulars. Then I said, all right, I think this is the real deal here. Like, I think it's going to happen.
And you called your dad again?
Oh, yeah. I call my dad again. I talk to him like a million times a day because, we've worked on this project for 17 years. So now our relationship, and before then, I worked in the restaurant. So he's always been my parent, but he's also always been my coworker. Weirdly enough, like in the restaurant, he was my boss. And now in writing the story, I'm his boss. So sometimes I have to kind of reel his ideas in because he gets a little overexcited, and
of course.
He also doesn't think everything for me, especially with all the social media, it's got to be on brand. It's got to be consistent. It's got to be, very concise and something consumable for people to want to subscribe to the content. And so, sometimes he'll call me and he'll say, can you do a shout out to my cousin in Canada because his birthday is today? And I'm like, what connection does your cousin in Canada have to the story? He's like, you know him. He's great. He's been to the house. We've stayed at his house. You ate his mother's manicotti. And I'm like, all great things. It's not on brand. I'm sorry, I can't do it. And so now, anytime he calls me with an idea, he's like, whatever you think, I'm just putting it out here. I'm just letting you know what I'm thinking. But if you're not thinking the same, I know you have the final say. So it's really funny because our roles have certainly reversed. But to this day, we talk at least 1 to 2 times a day. And it's always, we're ending the conversation with, if something comes up, give me a call, because some really crazy things with this book have come up, and, media opportunities and awards and all different things where I thought, oh my gosh, like, I can't believe this is me now. I just never dreamt that it was going to go this way,
I'm so happy for you.
Thank you.
Wow. Way to persevere. That is just the culmination of all that hard work. I mean, it's coming together, and I'm just, thank you for sharing so much inspiration with us.
Sure.
And, reminding people to keep putting it out there and look at those numbers. And,
yes.
It's, if you want to go the traditional route, just put in the effort. That's fantastic.
Don't ever give up. You got to believe in your own story more than you want anybody else to believe in you. Like, I don't need anybody, certainly listen if people are saying something's got to change, don't be pompous, be humble, but also just have this fire within you. And whenever somebody says no, just say, okay, you weren't the right partner. Somebody else will be down the line for me, but for some reason it wasn't you, and that's okay. And, they can go their separate way, you go your separate way, but don't beat yourself up, because in this industry, there's so many people that, have the potential to beat you up. Don't let that person beat you. Just don't do it.
That is fantastic. We are coming close to the end of our show, and yet here in recording time, we are past the hour mark, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions left.
All right, we'll be brief.
Oh my goodness. which makes me hysterical because everything else prior to this moment had like, be brief, be brief. And I'm like, but it's so good. And it's such a great conversation. And it's such a
I
great
know.
story. And like,
And I'm Italian, like
maybe-
we can't be brief. I'm sorry. It's like not part of our genetic makeup.
So you mentioned that you've gained a lot of experience from attending virtual writing and publishing conferences and that your request rate went up to 93%. Where did you find these conferences and what did you need to prepare for that conference? And how does this help you?
I found out about it just through Manuscript Academy. Somebody else was attending a virtual conference and they had mentioned the Writer's Day workshop. So I checked that out, but I also attended it's actually a conference in Virginia. It's the James something. Of course, I can't think of it right now, but
It always happens to us. It's okay.
that's in Virginia, and that's normally in the fall, and I did attend that as well. But just kind of doing a Google search.
Was that a publisher's conference or a writer's conference?
It was a writer's conference. I only attended writing conferences because I thought, you know what, I can get something out of them. So with the writing conferences, you're going basically for the classes and for those personalized classes that will help you specifically in your writing craft, specifically about, you know, what you need to prepare if you want to query, what to expect if and when you get a publishing deal, how to clean up your manuscript a little bit more, character development, like you name it. There's different classes that are available in these workshops. But the other, sorry.
So I love hearing you talk about that because I love writing workshops. I promote them all the time. I think they are invaluable for the networking, for surrounding yourself with other creative minds, the inspiration that comes from that. And Heather Belladonna, or H.L. Brooks, she was a guest on the show for episode 39, and she talks a lot about living a writerly life and how when you do that, it helps fuel your writing and your confidence in yourself and your passion and it helps to constantly rekindle that fire so that it doesn't go out, so that you can break free of imposter syndrome. So I just love hearing you reiterate that again. And I wanted to say thank you.
Absolutely. Very, very helpful. And, you know, the nice thing about the conference is it did have an option to pitch agents for additional cost. I think it was, you can get 10 or 15 minutes for an agent for $29 or something. But for me, that piece was the game changer because I was able to look at the list of agents and to determine, first of all, what agents would even be interested in this, because not every agent is going to be interested in your book. And also, your book is not going to be for everybody, but it's got to be.
It's not.
For somebody, right? Like, and I think people have a hard time, especially as first-time authors, right? We think we want to change the world with what we're doing, and you know, a lot of us will be able to, but you got to change the world first with your target audience. And so, the nice thing about going into these conferences is the agents' bios and the things that they're working on in their websites are pre-published. So I was able to go through and figure out who would be a potential good match for me. And then I was able to learn some stuff about that agent, not like creep them out or stalk them or find out like, you know, hey, I hear your childhood home was like, you know, this address and, you know, your mom's name is Sandy, like nothing like that, but just have a background of what they are into, what they've sold in the past, kind of where their genre likes and dislikes are. So whenever you go in and you meet them one-on-one, just like you want to personalize your query letter, you can personalize your pitch in a way, and you're talking to the person, and you're, you know, forming a bond in the relationship with the person as you're talking to them. And the nice thing about being live is, first of all, you can make a lasting impression on them by just doing very small things. Thing number one, coming prepared. With a lot of writing workshops, they'll say things like, come as you are. If you want to roll out of bed and come to this conference, you can do that. I'm telling you right now, do not do that. Do not do that.
Especially if you're trying to pitch yourself. Yes.
Exactly. Because think about it from a business perspective. Whenever you get into a relationship with an agent, that is a business relationship. If you were somebody that was hiring somebody else and somebody walked in with a pair of pajama pants and their hair was a mess and they had food stains and, coffee, stained teeth, and they looked just like very unkempt, they could be the smartest person in the world, but right off the bat, they're going to have to spend a certain amount of time proving whatever you're seeing wrong. So if you come in and you look professional, even though you don't have to, and a lot of conferences will sell you on the fact that you can be very relaxed. If you up the game and you're professional and you're ready, and whenever you get on there, your 10 minutes or your 15 minutes starts as soon as you get on with the agent, right?
Yep.
So don't waste your time. Don't say things like, oh, the weather here's so nice. What is it like where you are? No, you just get into it. You don't have to tell the person that you're nervous. Even if you are, most people will be nervous, right? It's just extra superfluous information that nobody really wants or needs, and it's wasting time and space. So you just jump in there. You just work like you would with a query letter, and you just sort of put all of the goods up front, the hookiest part of whatever it is that you're doing, a little bit about you, why it's, commercial enough to sell, and, seal the deal. And that's kind of what you do, and leave a little time for questions, comments, and discussion. And I asked every single agent that I met with, how could I make this stronger? What advice do you have for me? How do you foresee pitching this or changing this? Or, what advice would you give me for the next time I, talk about this project with somebody, or whenever I go out to this particular population? Use them also as an information resource, and think of it as such. Don't think of it as, this is my one chance, and if it doesn't come through, and if I don't get that ask or that request, I've failed. Think of it as, I have this professional one-on-one time with somebody's undivided attention to me and to my project. And you listen for those gems, because even if they don't request, they're going to give you some gems of knowledge. And for me, I automatically knew that one of the points that I had to overcome was the fact that the restaurant was closed for 20 plus years. And the fact that, people kind of felt like it was more of a localized story and not necessarily a national story. And so as I started pitching to more agents and more people, I addressed those 2 points very early on. I've been covered in the national media. I've been on Food and Beverage Magazine live talk show with the James Beard Award-winning host Jennifer English. So kind of dispelling that whole, this is just a local type of idea. You have to do that. You have to sort of listen to what people are saying, because if you don't, then you're really kind of wasting your time and wasting, your own money. And the other little practical tip that I will give people is, if you can sit by a window whenever you pitch people live, you can tape your notes up to eye level on that window. So if you get sort of lost in your points, instead of looking away from the camera and saying like, oh, hang on a minute, and kind of like looking down and breaking eye contact with that person, you just look beyond your screen and your notes are like right there. And so, it creates that personal connection with people because you're constantly looking into their eyes. And if you're warm and you're smiling, and if you mess up, guess what? Guess what I said last night whenever I was the MC to my daughter's talent show, right? Like, first of all, nobody's going to even know you messed up. And second of all, the show must go on. So you just pick up wherever you left off and you just do that little dance. You sing that little song. You shake that little shake, whatever you need to do. And you go get it, right?
Yes.
So, and those are the tips that I would really give that I think kind of helped to make my request rate a little higher.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Sure.
So, wrapping up, what does your father think about the book? The final manuscript, and what do your kids think about the book and watching you go through this insane, complicated, twisty, twirly-whirly, what did Doctor Who say? Timey-wimey, process?
Yeah. So honestly, this is my dad's dream. It's been his dream for a really long time. Whenever the restaurant closed, really a part of him almost died in a way, right? Like that was his livelihood. It was more than just a restaurant. To me, it was like the little brother that I never had, right? It was like that very annoying, thing that was always in my life until I actually started falling in love with it too. But just the people, the place, the food, it just created this atmosphere of warmth, and it created a space for him to make a difference in other people's lives. And whenever that was stripped away from us, the void was thick for him. And so to see that he has this like redemptive chapter, and I won't get into it too much because I don't want to bore the listeners, but he's really been through a lot health wise, and he's had in the past like 5 years he's had an open heart surgery situation. He's had not one but 2 kidney transplants, several hospitalizations for a myriad of different things, a couple of which were like 50 days in the hospital, day in, day out. He had his first kidney actually failed after he got the transplant. And the second time around, he was allergic to whatever they used to start the kidney up. And so a lot of times with allergic reactions, they don't happen until the second time your body's introduced to them, because your body remembers that they hate, whatever it is that you're putting into it. And so he was in a coma, an induced coma for a week after that operation. And weirdly enough, we always joke and say that the book saved his life because I had the manuscript completed at that point and we were starting to pitch it to agents. And my mom and sister and I would take turns and go to the hospital because it was only one visitor at that time. And we would read the book to him, as he was like
while he was in the coma.
Yeah, while he was in a coma. And, every once in a while, like we get like a hand squeeze or, like it just like giving him that reason to live and that reason to move forward and that reason to say, you know what, like, yes, all this really crappy stuff happened to me and I lost my livelihood. I lost all of, my possessions per se, but I have this new resurgence of just like, this is not how the final chapter ends, and I always tell people that whenever you're going through something like this that's so life-changing and so traumatic, you just put one foot in front of the other. And sometimes like you even have to schedule when you eat and when you sleep because you don't even think about that, right? Because you're just sort of, in your moment and in all of your sorrow. But to know that you can take your own pen and you can rewrite the story and you can tell people what happened from your perspective, I think there's a lot of power in that. And,
Yes.
I think that that has breathed in such a new life to him. I hear it in his voice, whenever I call him, it's, hey, how's everything going? Give me a call if something
Oh,
comes up. I hear that sense of excitement. And, he said to me the other day that he has not been this excited about life since the restaurant got its first big review from a food critic. And so that to me tells me that even if this book bombs, that I've done something right. In my mind, I've created a bestseller for somebody that is one of the most important people in my life. And I, cherish that. And so, he's very, very proud and just so excited about the story. And as far as my kids, it's interesting because you see it in little bits and pieces. They're young. They're like 7 and 9,
right.
right? But I think it was my 7-year-old. I think it was last year, so she must have been in first grade, and they were learning about nonfiction writing, right? And so she knew a little bit more about nonfiction writing than like the average bear in the first grade class. So they
Mm-hmm.
had to do a project and they had to write a nonfiction piece. And immediately she raised her hand and said, hey, Mrs. Barg, I'm wondering, does this need to be prescriptive nonfiction or are we talking narrative nonfiction? Because I can write either, but I just need to know what genre we need to be in. And, the teacher wrote me and she said, your daughter's like kind of teaching me things about publishing that like I've never heard of. Like I don't even know what these terms are. So
Right.
it's little gems like that. And, it's
Oh,
very cute because she was recently in an art show and she had to write a bio for herself. And so
ooh.
she described herself as an artist and a writer.
Ooh.
So, and my oldest daughter is very much into theatrics and she's very dramatic. And, her goal in life is to be an actor, but she's also going to be a famous author and write all about her life. And so I do think that they take a lot from it.
Mhm.
They love asking Google who I am. They think it's like hilarious
Of
whenever.
course they do.
And if they find YouTube videos of me on different media outlets, they also think that that's super duper hilarious and funny. And
My son gets to have a half hour in the morning with his dad before he goes to school, and that he watches Minecraft videos on YouTube. But he stumbled upon a clip from Parents Who Write with me talking, and he was like, Mama, you're on YouTube? And I was like,
yes,
why, yes, I
it's a
am.
big deal for them. Like if you're on
Yes.
YouTube or you're on TikTok, like it's a big situation. And
Right.
and my oldest daughter's constantly trying to sell the book. She's always got ideas, like we could do this walking tour. I need to call Grandpa. I got some ideas for him, and she'll just
Mm-hmm.
in the middle of we took a ski lesson and I'll sort of end here with the kids. So we took a ski lesson over the winter and I was in the ski lesson because skiing is not my gift. We all have several gifts, but skiing is not really mine. But my family loves to go and I'm trying my best and I can get down, but I'm just not as pretty as them because they all started whenever they were younger, my husband included. And so I'm taking this lesson and the guy's really, really nice. And he's trying to explain something about how to like get down the mountain and how to sort of shift your weight on the skis, right? And so he asks me, he goes, well, what do you do for a living? And I said, well, I'm a writer. And my daughter pipes in and she goes, yeah, she's coming out with a book actually this summer. And she was like, she is really well known. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, like what if I'm like ready to crawl under a rock right now? But, it's a different, I think growing up in a restaurant was like a very unique life. I think growing up with a parent who is a writer is also like a really unique life, like
Yes.
not many people sign up for this shindig, It's
Yes.
The benefits are great, but you've got to wait a long time for that pot of gold, right?
Yes, you do. That is adorable though. I love it. I also wanted to touch back just briefly on changing the narrative of our stories, because that's something that I talk about even with my coaching program. Not even changing the narrative of our stories in terms of putting together an entire book that you are then going to, spend querying, 265 times, but also just as parents, the guilt that we put on ourselves or the stories that we tell ourselves. It's so powerful when you can change the narrative of that story. Like when I was younger, my mother, bless her, called me lazy and a procrastinator all the time. And so to me, that's who I was. I am lazy and I am a procrastinator. And then I realized that actually, especially when it comes to my ADHD, I get hyper focused and hyper passionate about the things that I'm passionate about.
Sure.
And the fact that I don't want to do the laundry does not make me lazy and a procrastinator. I'm sorry, I can't get passionate about laundry.
Sure.
But and so I was finally able to change that narrative and forgive myself for, I'm sorry that the laundry is sitting in a basket for the last week. But I've got 135K on the revised version of book 1 for my series. So, right? Like, yeah. So I just wanted to point that out again, that we always have the ability and the opportunity and the creativity to change the narrative of our own stories, no matter how big or small.
Absolutely. And I think what's really important with my story, and something that I really had to drill into my dad, right? Because it's personal whenever you're telling a family story, and when it's not necessarily something that you want to do, it's really easy to talk about all the good parts of your story. I did this, I achieved this celebrity came, I got this award, I ran for this office, I was, a radio announcer at this place, I was a columnist, I was this, I achieved, but it's really hard to be honest about the things that happen to you in life and the bad stuff. And, we live in the world of Google, right? So if you Google me right now, or you Google my dad right now, there's stuff that's going to come up about our family, and it's not things that are erasable. And, it's nothing big. I mean, my dad didn't kill anybody. He went for tax evasion, right? But in the same way, I think at first, one of the challenges that he had, because it was such a painful period of time, you want to forget about it, right? You want to just sort of, admit whatever happened, serve your time, and then you move on, and all positive things. And we sort of forget about those hard times. But when you can tell that full story, knowing that it's out there anyways, right? People are going to find out about it. And if you don't tell it, you're going to look like James Fry from A Million Little Pieces, right? Where you're not telling your whole truth. Like, that will be a part of your story forever. So you got to own it. You got to embrace it. And I love what you said, Erin, about, you don't necessarily need to write an entire manuscript and shop it around and, put your story out to the world. But you have to get to a sense where you're at peace with it, and where you have this piece of understanding. And I know you had mentioned with you, it was a realization that, no, I'm not lazy. I'm just very focused about the things that I have passion about. So I can't get passionate about doing laundry or house chores, but I can certainly get passionate about writing a fantasy or a literary fiction novel. Like that's your thing, and that's where you shine and you soar. So for me personally, it was very cathartic to be able to take my own pen back, to write my own story, and to tell people why this happened and to not shy away from it. And also to not feel any shame or guilt. And I think that's probably also why it took me 17 years, was a lot to process. And now I don't live in shame. I just, this is who you get all the time. You see me on the playground. This is who you get, right? I was
Yes.
joking around like the other week I was on iHeartRadio, and we had to film really late because I was the Girl Scout leader. The talent show was coming up, and I was the person that choreographed the talent show dance, and nobody else knew the dance. So I had to teach all of these kids the dance. And then the next meeting, we were going to film the dance. So I couldn't not go to the Girl Scout meeting. So I told iHeartRadio, I'm like, listen, I'll be on, but it's got to be 8:30 at night because I don't get done with this Girl Scout meeting. So I'm running out of the Girl Scout meeting. I'm telling everybody, like, listen, I can't talk. I have to be on iHeartRadio, like right now. And they're like, why are you at this Girl Scout meeting? Like, because like I committed to it. That's who I am. And so, as I was getting my makeup done and like my dog's peeing on the floor because she's really excited that like a new person's over, I'm like cleaning up pee, trying to get on for a sound check and hop on the radio. And it's like, this is me. This is who I show up as all the time, love it or hate it. And when you can embrace that part of you and just be your authentic you, and you write like that and you talk like that, people love that because they buy the fact that you are just you and you don't have to feel any shame. You don't have to feel any guilt. It's just part of your story. That's it. It's just part of your story.
And look at fictional characters, right? We want complex characters. We want characters who are flawed. We want to see them struggle and make mistakes and how they rise for them. So it's the same thing when you're writing nonfiction. It's the same thing when we're telling our own stories. People connect with our flaws because that's what makes us human.
Absolutely.
And then they feel less alone. They feel more validated. They feel more understood. They can start letting go of their own guilt to realize, wow, it's not just me. One of the biggest revelations that I had with starting this podcast was by telling my own story with the anxiety and the depression and the anger that I had when I had my two little kids and I didn't understand what was going on with me and how much I used to scream in my then 4-year-old's face. Of course I have the guilt. Why? Of course I would rather forget it and bury it and just move past it. But it was by telling those stories and being honest about it that, one, I was able to get help. And then two, I was able to connect with other parents and help them to realize like this, dude, parenting is hard. You're not a failure for it.
No.
And this way they can then recognize like, wow, you know what? I really am struggling. How can I also get more help? And it's okay to ask for help.
Okay to ask for help. That's why people are here. And you're right. Parenting is one of the hardest gigs that definitely does not come with a manual. And you've got to give yourself grace. There are going to be times where you feel like you're just on top of your game, and everything's going right and your kids are perfectly behaved and they're doing well in school and they're soaring socially. And then there are going to be those other times where it's like everything's going wrong, and it's just, you're trying your hardest, but it seems like you're not getting through it all. And you feel like you're a complete failure and you just feel horrible. But you know what? You gotta like embrace those times too. And just like you said, be true to yourself and know that you can get help. And there's no shame in getting that help. It's not that you're saying I'm less than, I'm weak. I can't do this, I surrender. It's more you're empowering yourself to get more help, to be better, to feel more supported. And, that's what it's all
Yes.
about. We as humans, we need other people.
Yes. And it's very empowering when you finally have the language and the understanding to express what it is that you are struggling with
Mm-hmm.
rather than burying it deep. For me to say to my husband now, hey, I can feel my anxiety ramping up right now. It's
Mm-hmm.
getting pretty bad. I need to step away and calm my body and just give myself a chance to de-stress and regroup and clear my head. And he's like, I've got it.
Mm-hmm.
Go. And I
Mm-hmm.
can recognize that now. If I never talked about this stuff, I wouldn't be able to be proactive about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's helped my son tremendously, and the healing that the both of us have gone through because I've been able to change the narrative. And you don't erase the guilt, but you better understand it, and therefore you can let it go
Mm-hmm.
and make progress to continue the cycle of healing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very different where 2 years ago I'd be like, I failed my son, I was screaming at him, I've ruined him, I've traumatized him, I was the worst mother in the world, right? I don't want to tell that story. I don't want to tell that story to my son either. Like, he saw me struggling. But by talking about it, by being able to change the narrative, not lying, but being
Right.
honest and looking at the complete story, I can say, I was struggling. I
Right.
realized that I was struggling. I asked for help. I got help. And even when I was at my worst, I would come back and I would always talk to my son about it. And I would
Mm-hmm.
apologize and say, you don't deserve to be talked to like this.
Mm-hmm.
And mama's going to keep working on this and figuring out like how I can get better control over my feelings. And, I want to be a safe space for you. And I can focus on those stories rather than the worst moments.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because we all have those moments.
Mm-hmm. We do,
Mm-hmm.
and
And I think the people that don't, I honestly think that they're just not honest about it.
right. We all have those moments.
We all have those
Um,
moments.
yeah, and I think it speaks volumes with how, with being able to talk about it
Mm-hmm.
and be honest, and this way we can move forward. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the show. All of your contact information is in the show notes. So, your nope, all of your contact information is in the show notes. So, is there any last bit of advice that you would like to share before we go?
I would just say that if it is your dream to have something published, you can definitely achieve it and you can definitely obtain it. And do not let anybody tell you otherwise. It is possible for you. So just keep on trying, just keep on persevering. You will find the way, or the way will find you. And you don't have to worry about it. And, you don't have to stress about it. And, take my advice. I felt so empty and so anxious. And I was checking my email 1,000 times a day, seeing if anybody was going to contact me. And, try to distract yourself through that process, whether you're working on another project or, you're volunteering or you're doing something where you can just sort of take your mind off of it. Don't put so much pressure onto yourself. I wish that I didn't put so much pressure onto myself through this process. That's the best advice that I could give that I didn't take.
Isn't that always the case?
I know.
It's so frustrating. It's funny. When we were talking previously, you had said to me, don't get into narrative fiction or don't get into narrative
exactly.
nonfiction.
That is actually good advice too. So if you have, and I will kind of leave it at that too, People told me this for a long time and I didn't want to believe them, right? So if you're somebody that writes a million different genres, or maybe even more than just narrative nonfiction, try to go out with your fiction piece first if you can, because it's much easier to sell a fiction piece because they're not so worried about your platform and your marketing reach as they are about your writing. So if you can sell that piece first, then your narrative nonfiction fiction piece can sort of be your follow-up. It is very hard to sell a narrative nonfiction to somebody who's not a celebrity the first time out of the gate. And I think my numbers speak volumes to that. I didn't want to believe it, but in reality, I think it is true. That being said, also speaking of reality, if you go on a reality TV show and you have trouble seeing or spelling your name, you probably will get a book deal. So, that's what I've heard from editors, ex-editors too. My good friend is an ex-editor and she quit because she said, I had to pass on all of these wonderful projects and everything that they wanted to greenlight was reality stars from like The Bachelorette. And she said, these people get roses for doing the most like superficial, like horrible things on television, and they're getting book deals. And then like, Joe Smith's out here like pouring his heart and soul into his writing, and he's got this like excellent piece. And I'm told to look past it. Like, I can't do that anymore. I'm not doing that,
Kudos to your friend. Oh,
yeah.
man.
And now she's an intuitive manuscript reader, which is actually kind of cool, Neat job, cool. Right?
Yeah. Well, thank you again for joining me on the show. And till next time.
Thank you.